welcome back to ARC Maine. Last week, we told you about an issue the I-Team has been following for months concerning fire departments across the state.
Yeah, this morning we're joined by the I-Team's Dan Lampariello, and Dan, he's going to talk about the problem Maine firefighters are seeing and how the I-Team became aware of it. Dan?
Well, guys, like many of the stories that we do, it first came to us from a tip. We have the great tip line here that our viewers are constantly calling into or emailing us with. And this was one that we heard from a local fire department about. They had said, you know, have you guys heard about this proposal from OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Hazard Administration, that basically wants to rewrite how fire departments operate? And so we took a deep dive into it. We've been covering it now almost 4 months, and it's going to be probably plenty more months until we see it in a final outcome. So it's just been something we've wanted to take a dive into, and the research has been really driving us into how it's going to impact the state of Maine, especially.
Yeah, because it's not just a Maine issue potentially or impact. You know, this is across the country.
This is rewriting 40 years of firefighting standard. The new proposal is called the Emergency Response Standard for firefighters, paramedics, all the people who are on the front lines of keeping people safe in their communities. And what we found is across the country, people are kind of up in arms about the current proposal as it stands. And that's what we've been trying to highlight of what are the impacts going to be.
Yeah, and a lot of these have to do with some of the rural fire departments all across the country, including here in Maine. What are some of the impacts we'll be seeing around the state?
So around the state, I mean, we're a state of tiny departments, and your department in your community is the heart of your community. That's your first line of defense, if you will. And I'll let the head of the Fire Chiefs Association, who you hear from here in a second, kind of speak to it. But I think he sums it up pretty well, that this could have a devastating impact because, again, that first line of defense, if you don't have that, it's going to really impact not only your insurance rates and those types of things, but just the wait times that you may have to have an ambulance or a fire department come if you have an emergency at your home. So I'll let him speak to it here because I think he has a really good perspective.
There's going to be departments that it's a bump in the road, and there'll be other departments that can be totally devastated, and the impact to the communities could be astronomical between costs, and they're going to struggle with what to provide for public safety within their community.
So the way he sets that up, there's going to be some that it's going to be a little hiccup. There's going to be some that it's going to completely devastate if what's written currently actually passes. And there's 22 different changes. It has to do with the turnout gear that these guys wear. That's very, very expensive. A lot of them, it would need to be replaced every few years, where now a lot of them use it for 10, 15 years because of how expensive it is. Some would have to make major changes to their buildings to have total decontamination areas for that gear. There'd be different stringent training requirements that volunteer agencies just may not be able to meet, because a lot of those volunteers work second, sometimes third jobs outside of being a local volunteer firefighter. The statistic, as we were doing the research, that really stood out to me, 85% of fire agencies in our state are either partially or primarily volunteer.
Wow.
Just a huge number. I mean, you think of your Portland, your Freeport, your Bangor, your Augusta, Lewiston, Auburn, that have these full-time firefighters that are 20, 30, 40 people, but then you have little towns like Monmouth or Durham that have maybe 20 volunteers, but when you have a fire, sometimes you may only get 5 that actually want to show up and have the availability.
Yeah, that's what happens. They have pagers or cell phones on, and they're working at the grocery store or an electrician or whatever, and they get the call, come to the fire department right now, go fight the fire.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's got to be tough, though, because you do want to be, up to date. You want to have good equipment. You want to have probably some of these improvements that are being pitched here.
And everyone we've talked to here in the state is like, we are not opposed to getting these critical safety standards updated.
Yeah.
It's just the timeline that they want to implement them.
Okay.
Right now, it looks like around 2 to 3 years that they'd have to come into compliance. A lot of departments here are advocating for about 10 to 15 years to allow people to be able to do this. And the community should really care about this, because if they can't come into compliance, there's going to be a risk that these departments could close. And Chief St. Michel with the Chiefs Association touches on this here, that it could impact your insurance rate and other issues that you don't even think about, because you just think you're going to call 911, your fire department's going to show up. I'll let him speak to this, though.
There's communities that, really small communities that have $10,000, $20,000 operating budget. turnout gear alone is $4,000 or $5,000 per set, without anything like a thermal imaging camera, SCBA. The financial impact to the communities is going to make communities make tough decisions.
It's also just interesting to hear him talk about the things about firefighting. I don't even know about this equipment that they even have.
It's so expensive.
Yeah.
I had no idea. A piece of turnout gear, the jackets that you see behind us here, I mean, $15,000 for one piece of that. So really, communities, like he said, are going to have to make some tough decisions.
Well, but even if they, right now they're talking about 2 or 3 years, but even if it was 4 or 5 years, I mean, they're going to need federal funds, right?
Absolutely.
I think it could be 10 years.
And that's what
in some of these smaller fire departments, it probably wouldn't work, right?
100%.
Yeah.
And there was a public comment period that ended last week, and state legislators, private citizens, fire departments all weighed in. Across the country, there were more than 4,000 letters sent to OSHA about this. And the biggest thing was, is the federal government going to help fund this, or is this going to be an unfunded mandate that we see a lot of times? So definitely the conversation is going to be going on over the next few months. There is a public hearing in November that we're going to be sure to cover here. And in between, we're just going to keep highlighting the issue because, again, an important one for public safety in our state.
So firefighters, fire chiefs, they're not being overly dramatic, saying that they could close some of these fire departments down.
Not at all.
Yeah.
All right, Dan, thank you so much for following this so closely. And now we have a little bit more about that timeline, too. So we'll keep following, especially in November.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah.
And the new set. This is wonderful.
Yeah,
we're excited to be doing this.
Right?
Perfect.
Really comfortable.
Yeah, it's great.
Right? Well, hopefully we'll have you back on soon.